Exodus chapter 17, beginning around verse number 8. I'm going to read out of the New King James Version today. Exodus chapter 17, beginning at verse number 8. I know it's raining outside and it can make it a little sleepy, but I'm going to wake you up in a minute, okay? Exodus chapter 17, beginning at verse number 8. Word of the Lord says, Now Amalek came and fought with Israel in Rephidim. And Moses said to Joshua, Choose us some men and go out and fight with Amalek. And tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand. So Joshua did as Moses said to him and fought with Amalek. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur, they went up to the top of the hill. And so it was when Moses held up his hand that Israel prevailed. And when he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands became heavy, so Aaron and Hur took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. And then they supported his hands, one on one side and the other on the other side. And Moses' hands were steady until the going down of the sun. That's enough. Be seated in the presence of the Lord. Family, verse 11 says, And so it was when Moses held up his hand that Israel prevailed. And when he let his hand down, the enemy, Amalek, prevailed. Verse number 12 says, But Moses' hands became heavy. Notice Joshua down at the base of the mountain, Joshua did just as Moses had instructed him to do. He and his men were fighting the Amalekites. Moses and Aaron and Ben-Hur, they were all in position. They were doing right what they were supposed to do, right where they were supposed to be. They stood on the top of the hill. And the battle was unfolding just as it was meant to unfold. As Moses raised up his hands, Israel's army was victorious. Everything was happening like it was supposed to happen. But in spite of all of that, regardless of all the right things being done and all the right things being in place and all the right things being said and all the right things, in spite of all the right things, Moses' arms still got tired. They still got tired. You can be doing everything you're supposed to be doing. You can be standing right where God told you to stand, fighting how he told you to fight, leaning where he told you to lean. In fact, you can be in the middle of his will and his plan for your life, watching it unfold just as he designed it. And family, at some point, something's going to happen, and you're still going to be faced with the question, what do I do when my arms get tired? What do I do when my arms get tired? What do I do when I'm trying my best to stay flat-footed and faithful to God's purpose and his plan for my life, but I feel like my tank is getting low and my vision is getting blurry? There's so much going on. There's so much weight. There's so much sorrow around me. I'm trying to do my best. I'm trying to stay in there. I'm trying to stand flat-footed, but I'm looking at my life and I'm tired. Well, what do I do? When I've been fighting for so long, I'm starting to forget what the point was in the first place. What do I do when this battle is tougher than I expected, when it feels like I'm losing things I didn't expect to lose? I'm navigating things I never expected to have to navigate. I'm enduring things I don't feel it's fair for me to have to endure. What do I do when my hands are tired? Now I feel like I'm starting to lose my balance. I'm starting to lose my grip. My footing feels like it's slipping, and I don't know how long I can keep my hands raised under these conditions. What do you do, family, when your arms get tired? Because of life, because of reality, because of pain, because of disappointment, because of sorrow, because of frustration, because of disappointment, because of poverty, because of sickness. What do I do when my arms are tired? I just came back fresh off a little bit of time away. And I want to share with you some things the Lord has been sharing with me, because believe it or not, I've been asking some of them same questions. I've been asking some of them same questions, and we've been talking about some of them same things. The Lord and I, there's a word I've been hearing him whisper in the midst of my own personal journey over the past few weeks as I've sat with him, as I've looked at the world and then looked at him, and I looked at the world and looked at him like, what's going on? There's some things that's going on, but there's a whisper I've been hearing him say to me in the midst of my journey. There's a word that's been bouncing around the echo chamber of my heart as I've been sitting with the Lord, and that word is grit. Grit. Tell your neighbor, you need grit to go where you're going. Come on, tell them they need to hear it. You need grit to stand where you're standing. You need grit. You need grit in this season. What is grit? Grit is the courage to show up and stand where God told you to stand. It's the courage to endure what he told you to endure. It's grit. It's grit. It's the strength to keep going. It's the faith to keep trusting and moving forward in God, even when it hurts to do so. It's grit. Grit is the God-given ability to endure hard things. Like a good soldier, without losing your hope, without losing your focus, without losing your fight. Grit is what Paul was talking about in Galatians 6, verse 9, when he said, let us not grow weary in doing good, for in due season, somebody say due season, in due season you shall reap if you faint not. It's what the writer of Hebrews was referring to in Hebrews 10:36 when he said, you have need of endurance, so that after you have done the will of God, you may receive the promise. This is not an option. You need endurance to deal with what you're about to deal with. You need fight. You need grit. It's what the Hebrews writer was saying in chapter 12, verse 7 of that same book. He said, endure hardship as discipline, because God is treating you as his children. Believe it or not, this is what it looks like to stand as a child of God. Grit. Grit. You need grit to go where you have to go in this season. You need grit to stand where you have to stand in this season. You need grit to endure what you have to endure in this season. You need grit, and that's where God is focusing our attention, even over the next several weeks as a church family. In fact, the name of our August series is God, Give Us Grit. God, give us grit. Give us grit. Somebody say, give me grit. Because guess what? Life's not going to get easier. I hate to break it to you. Trouble is not going to stop coming. Issues are not going to stop popping up. What you need is some godly grit. Family, look at your life for just a minute. Look at your life. Do you have the grittiness you need for the season of life that you're in? Do you? Do you have the grittiness that you need for what's facing you? Do you have the spiritual grittiness to deal with the season you're in? Do you have the grittiness to navigate the moment in history that you find yourself in? Do you have the grittiness to negotiate the obstacles and the emotional battles that are facing you and your family right now? I mean, you've been praying for breakthrough. You've been asking God for help. You've been trying to figure out why all of this is happening. What's the lesson in it? Why am I facing this? Why am I dealing with this family? What if the whole, at least part of the outcome here, part of the lesson that God's teaching us through our life is maybe more than the specific battle. Maybe it's more than the battle that you're facing. Well, what if the lesson isn't about the position or the posture where you are on the mountain? What if the lesson isn't about all the things you're doing on the mountain and all the levers you're trying to pull and all the right things you're trying to do? What if he's just trying to show you how to show up to moments in your life when the only thing that will get you to the other side of the battle you're going through is God-given grit? Give us grit. Give us grit, God. What is your level of spiritual grit look like today? What does it look like? What does your spiritual fight look like in this moment? How full is your tank to fight through what you're facing? How spiritually resilient are you? What's your level of holy stubbornness right now? Because family, I need to be honest with you. I know I sound like a Debbie Downer today. I'm just trying to tell you the truth. I believe we're entering a season where Christians, real Christians, are going to need their grit like never before. Real Christians are going to need their grit in this season. Real Christians are going to need their grit like never before. We're going to need our spiritual resilience. We're going to need our holy stubbornness right in through here. I wholeheartedly believe, it's just me, but I wholeheartedly believe that we are the last day church. I believe that. I do. I believe it. All signs point to last day. And that means we're going to need to battle through some things to hold on to our assignment. But ask yourself how easily in this moment, ask yourself, how easily do I get defeated in my mind in this season of life? Before a battle even comes, how easily are you defeated in your mind today? How quickly are you distracted by your emotions today? How often are you victim to the flustering of your focus in this season of life? And what would it look like if you allowed God to triage your grit today? What would it look like if you got an impartation of grit? What would change in your life? What would change in your mouth? What would change in your heart? What would change in your brain if you received an impartation of grit from God? Ephesians 6:12, Paul says this. He says, "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood." That's what he says. Listen, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Now, you probably heard that scripture before, but I need you to sit with that for just a moment. What is Paul talking about here? Well, fam, even when you don't know who you are, your enemy knows who you are, and he's assembled a team to take you out. We praying for cars and houses, and the enemy's assembling teams to slow us down. Paul says we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities. The Greek word here is archos. It means rulers or chief authorities. Can I teach you for a minute? There's principalities. There's demonic principalities out there. They're territorial spirits. They're chiefs. They're rulers in the demonic realm. They're high-ranking demonic forces, and they're almost like demonic governors. They're responsible for a region, for cities, and for cultures, and they shape environments, and they influence atmospheres, and they normalize what God never intended to be normalized. They promote things that God never intended to be promoted. They push things through that God never intended to be pushed through. In this system, there are some principalities that we need to recognize are active. He said, we wrestle not against flesh and blood. We wrestle against principalities. And then he said we wrestle against powers. The Greek there is exousias. That's delegated authority. So you've got the principalities, you've got the governor, and then you've got the delegated authority. You got the one who the principality gave the assignment to come to you specifically and mess with you. He's trying to deal with you specifically. He has delegated authority to mess with you. Where's the authority come from? Well, every time you open up the door to sin in your life, you create space for that delegated authority to come and mess with you in the realm and the lane of the sin that you opened up in your life. It's delegated authority. It's powers. Powers. Delegated authority. Spiritual enforcers of the enemy's agenda. They pressure, they torment, they manipulate, they whisper to your soul lies and try to discourage you in the midst of the battle that you're in. They've been delegated to attack you specifically. Paul said, we wrestle not against flesh and blood. We wrestle against principalities and powers. And then he said, we wrestle against rulers of the darkness of this world. That's kosmokratoros in the Greek. That's cosmic level influence. So that's demonic strategists. They're sitting up there strategizing how to mess with you. Authorities of spiritual wickedness in high places. It literally means it's spiritual beings of wickedness in the heavenly realm. These are forces operating in invisible spiritual dimensions, and they're influencing the visible world. They work behind systems in the world. They work behind media. They work behind law, and they work behind culture, and they work behind systems. They're strategizing ways to mess you up. That's what you're wrestling against. That's what you're dealing with in this era. We're wrestling against systematic and systemic evil in high places. And that evil is ancient and it's storied. But just like you and I think that evil, it senses the season that we're in. I ain't the only one that feel like we in the last days. Those authorities, those powers, they're acting on double time, on overtime right now because they smell in the air the season that we're in. They sense the groaning of creation for its creator. They done heard the wars and the rumors of wars. They got news, CNN and Fox News like everybody else. They looking and seeing what's going on, and they're active and manipulating and trying to push stuff through. They know that the time is short, and so in this season, we've got to work with focus and intentionality even in what we're dealing with in our personal lives. Intentionality. We got to focus and recognize the season that we sit in right now. And we got to ask ourselves the question, even with tears in my eyes, do I have the grit I need for the season I'm in? There's victory on the other side of your grit. There's victory on the other side of this season you're in. There's victory on the other side of it. God is calling us to grit. He's calling us to grit. He's calling us to unleash and unlock a fight in ourselves, inside of ourselves. He's calling us to a place of tenacity of our heart and tenacity of our mind and tenacity of our focus. He's calling us to walk with Him for the healing that we need to navigate the system and the situation that we're in. He's calling us. That's why Paul finishes this whole text, Ephesians 6. I'm going to go back to it because he gives us some advice. What do we do with the powers and the principalities and the spiritual wickedness in high places? What do we do with all of this? Well, he says, verse 12, he says, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. And then he goes on to say, therefore, put on the full armor of God. Tell your neighbor, you got to get gritty now. Put on the full armor of God. He said, put on the full armor of God so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. And after you have done all to stand therefore. Are you gritty enough for the season you're in? Now listen, I need to introduce something to you. We're going to take our time over the next few weeks. But I need to introduce something to you, a term that you've probably heard, but I need us to develop more than a casual relationship with this term in this season. The term is spiritual warfare. It's not a bumper sticker term, not a t-shirt term. That's not for your refrigerator magnet. This real deal. I need you to develop an appetite and a sensitivity around spiritual warfare. Because gritty Christians know how to operate in spiritual warfare. Even with tears in your eyes, even with issues and problems and vicissitudes, even ups and downs, even battling depression, even don't know how you're going to pay your bill, even the sickness in your body, even the pill bottle, trying to figure out how to stretch it. Christians know how to fight in spiritual warfare. They know how to tarry. Y'all ever heard that term before? Know how to tarry. Time out for 15-second prayers. Gritty Christians know how to tarry, to wait until he answers. That's gritty Christians know how to tarry. Gritty Christians know how to fast and pray. Gritty Christians know how to plead the blood of Jesus over their family. You know what that means? They plead the blood of Jesus. I'm going to teach that in a couple of weeks. Gritty Christians know how to plead the blood of Jesus. And I know some of that might sound old school and feel old school, but look, that's where we are, y'all. Old school got a whole lot of people through. That's where we are. That's what spiritual grit is. It's the ability to war in the spirit. To war, not just in the spirit, but to war your flesh in the natural. That's spiritual warfare. To war the influence and the voice of the enemy, to war against the culture's impact on your mind, to war just enough to find the few more degrees of grit you need to keep your arms lifted in battle. That's what we're talking about. God, give us grit. God, give us grit. Give us spiritual grit. That's exactly what Moses and his team had in Exodus 17. I'm almost done. Moses and his team, they'd been minding their own business there in 17. Minding their own business. They were on their way to Sinai to get the Ten Commandments. God was going to speak to them. They had an appointment with God. And out of nowhere, they were ambushed in the middle of the wilderness. They were ambushed. They were on their way to encounter with God, and they were ambushed. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, they found themselves under attack from an enemy, the Amalekites. Isn't that just like life? Isn't that just like life? You're on your way trying to get through the desert, trying to get through what you're going through, just trying to deal with what you're facing. And before you know it, you've been the victim of a sneak attack. The enemy has come in whispering stuff in your mind and whispering stuff in your heart and pulling you back to stuff you laid down a whole long time ago, trying to deal with what you're dealing with now, reminding you of people and reminding you of substance and reminding you of stuff that God already delivered you from because he's trying to trick you with the sneak attack. Minding their own business, and here come the Amalekites in the wilderness, ambushing them, trying to take them off a mission, trying to take them off a plan, trying to distract them from their appointment with God. So Israel finds themselves in a battle they couldn't ignore. It was a crisis they hadn't prepared for. It was happening. They couldn't pretend it wasn't happening. They had to deal with what they were facing. Moses was an old man by now. He was old. He was long past the age where it was his assignment to lead the people in physical battle, because he used to be on the front lines right there with them. He used to be right there with them, but his assignment had passed. God had moved him to a different role. So Moses called on Joshua to lead the physical battle, and Moses started warring in the spirit. Moses, his brother Aaron and their nephew Hur, they sent Joshua and his men into battle, and they went up and they perched themselves on a high hill right above the battle. They got in position, and listen, it was a tough battle. It was a challenging battle, but even in the midst of the difficulty, they knew God was with them. In fact, they started to notice that as Moses lifted up his hands to the Lord, the crisis began to dissipate. Have you ever noticed that in your life? When you lift up your hands to the Lord, it may not change everything you're dealing with. It might not make make everything better. It may not fix what you lost, but something begins to dissipate in you when you start lifting up your hands to the Lord. And that's what they noticed. Moses would lift up his hands, and the wind of the battle would change, and all of a sudden Israel would begin to win. The crisis would dissipate. The battle began to turn in Israel's favor. But they noticed when Moses lowered his hands, the crisis stirred up again. The battle went in the enemy's favor. But Moses, he was lifting up his hand, and it was going down. He's lifting up his hand, and it was going down. Lifting up his hand, going down again. Remember, Moses was an old man. He was tired. He'd been through a lot of battles. He'd navigated a whole lot of challenges. And sometimes when you've been through some stuff, even when you see victory, you can still get tired in the battle. Moses, he had his hands lifted, but he got tired. He got weary. And when Moses' arms started to fall, Israel would begin to lose. And so here's three quick things I want to tell you. I'm going to go home. Three quick lessons I want us to learn about how to maintain grit when your arms get tired. 3 quick lessons. What does God want us to know about what effective spiritual warfare means in this season? Number 1, grit knows where to go. Grit knows where to go. Family, verse 8 says, now Amalek came and fought with Israel in Rephidim, and Moses said to Joshua, choose us some men and go out and fight with Amalek, and tomorrow, he said, I will stand on the top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand. Listen, family, before Moses even got to the battle, he had already decided where he was going to stand in the battle. Before the battle even started, Moses knew where he was going to stand in the battle. And not only that, he knew what would be in his hand in the middle of the battle. Moses didn't try to stand on the battlefield with Joshua. He wasn't trying to relive the glory days. He wasn't trying to be out of position. He didn't stand on the field with Joshua. He went up to the top of the hill. Somebody needs to understand, you got a seat that you need to be in. You got a spot that you need to be in battle. You need to be in the right position in battle. Moses, he went up to the top of the wheel. He got into a position where he was positioned between the battle on the ground and God in heaven. He needed to be in the right position. He positioned himself in between the issue on the ground and the God who could do something about it. That's where he positioned himself. Moses, he got into an intercessory position. He got into an intercessory position. He got into an intercessory posture. Listen, if you can ever, even in the midst of your battle, in the midst of your chaos, in the midst of your broken heart, if you can ever master the art of an intercessory posture when it comes to spiritual warfare, if you can ever master that art, you will be a force to be reckoned with. What does it look like to become an intercessor in the midst of warfare? Well, family, understand, sometimes grit isn't a matter of you fighting harder. Sometimes we think, let me just fight harder. Let me just do more. Let me just busy myself. No, grit is not necessarily a matter of just fighting harder. It's not a matter of you fighting harder. It's about you praying higher. Sometimes grit, it's not about you fighting harder. It's about you praying higher. It's about praying from an elevated place, an elevated posture, praying from a place where you can see what's going on earth, but you can also hear what's being said about it in heaven. That's what spiritual warfare is really about. Some of us keep losing battles because we're fighting them on the wrong level. We're fighting them from the wrong position, from the wrong posture, the wrong frame of mind, the wrong posture of heart. Sometimes we lose because we're not fighting them from the right position. You got to go higher in prayer, higher in fasting, higher in focus. Spiritual grit, it always finds its posture before it can find its power. It's got to find its posture. It's got to find its position between God and the problem. Not meddling in the problem, trying to fix it. And God, can you fix this? Can you deal with this? God, come on over here and deal. No, you got to get in the middle of things. You've got to stand between God and the problem. You've got to intercede between God and the issue. Higher in prayer, higher in fasting. Elevate your mind, elevate your heart so that you can hear God. No, not only did Moses find himself on the hill, but he found himself with the rod in his hand. Why was the rod significant? Well, it was the same rod God used to part the Red Sea. It was the same rod that God used to turn the Nile into blood. It was the same rod that God used to release the other plagues in Egypt. See, Moses and that rod had history. They had history. So when he took it to the hill, he brought it to remind himself and to remind the people of what God had already done for them in warfare long past. Sometimes we got to just sit and remember what God has already done. Remember your rod. What's your rod, family? What reminds you of God's proven faithfulness? Whatever that is that reminds you of what He is, whatever testimony lives inside your rod, I want you to remember it because it's ultimately what's going to help you overcome. That's Revelations 12:11 is talking about. It says, and they overcame by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. Not just what Jesus did, but what they remembered that Jesus did. That's what caused them to overcome. Family, grit knows where to go. Not only that, grit doesn't go alone. It doesn't go alone. Verse 8 says, Amalek came and fought the Israelites in Rephidim, and Moses said to Joshua, choose us some men, and I'm going to go to the top of the mountain. And verse 10 says, Joshua did as Moses said, and they fought with Amalek, and Moses and Aaron and Hur went up to the top of the hill. Moses and Aaron and Hur went up to the top of the hill. And so it was when Moses held up his hand, Israel prevailed, and when he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hand became heavy, so Aaron and Hur took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it, and then they supported his hands. Family, contrary to popular belief, spiritual grit is not a solo sport. It's a team sport. It doesn't look like isolation. It looks like community. It means community. Whatever you're carrying, don't carry it alone. Whatever you're dealing with, don't deal with it alone. Some of us are tired, not just because we're weak. We're tired because we're lonely in our weakness. Some of us are exhausted, not because of the battle. We're exhausted because we're trying to fight it alone. God never told us to fight alone. We need somebody to help hold our hands. You need somebody who can see you're struggling, who can recognize the weight of what you're carrying, even when you don't say a word. Moses didn't try to tough it out alone. He didn't pretend like everything was fine, because it wasn't. He didn't try to pretend. When his strength gave out, Aaron and Hur, they were right there to lift up his arms. That's spiritual grit, not just the courage to keep going, but it's the humility to lean on somebody else when you can't keep going. Look at the language in verse 12. It says, but Moses' hands became heavy, so they took a stone and put it under him, and they supported his hands. That word supported in the Hebrew is tamak. It's tamak. It means to brace. It means to sustain. It means to hold up or to lean into. In other words, it doesn't just mean they held his arms. It means they became a structure around him. They became an infrastructure around him. They became kind of like a leaning post for him, so that even if he wanted to fall, he couldn't, because of the structure that was around him. So let me say it like this. Grit knows when to reach out. It also knows who to reach for. That's why Ecclesiastes 4:9-10, it says 2 are better than 1, because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, one will lift him up as his companion. But woe to the one who is alone when he falls, for he has no one to help him up. Family, spiritual grit isn't just about being strong. It's about being strategic enough to stay in community so you can be strong. It's about knowing that even when your faith is firm, your arms may still fail. It's about being mature enough to say, I need help holding up my arms. I need help holding up my confession. I need help holding up my emotions because of what I'm going through, because of what I'm dealing with. I need help. That's spiritual grit too. I wonder who you've got around you that knows how to support your hands. Who do you have around you who can sit beside you when the calling is costly and the warfare is real? Aaron and Hur didn't just watch Moses struggle. They engaged with him in the struggle. Who do you have that can walk with you in the midst of your stuff? That's what real spiritual community is. That's what spiritual grit looks like. Family, grit knows where to go. Grit doesn't go alone. And finally, grit holds on until the sun goes down. Verse 11 says, and so it was when Moses held up his hand that Israel prevailed, and when he let his hand down, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands became heavy, so Aaron and Hur took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. And then they supported his hands, one on one side and the other on the other side. And Moses' hands were steady until the going down of the sun. Family, Moses, he didn't get any stronger in that moment. He wasn't any wiser. He wasn't any smarter. He and his team were just gritty. And what did grit look like? Grit looks like his hands becoming steady until the sun went down. Look, there's a lot of people in this world looking for some steady. They're just looking for some steady. They think they want wealth. They think they want fame. They think they want likes and whatever the other thing is on social media. They think they want all of that. But what they really crave is for something, anything, to feel steady. And that's the gift of grit. Everything may not be perfect, but God can create some steady in you. He can create some balance in you. He can create some peace. The Bible says peace that surpasses understanding. That means peace that does not make sense. He can give that to you when we unlock our spiritual grit. You can look at my life and see, don't nothing look steady. Not near one nickel in my bank account does it look steady. But the grit that God has unlocked in me gives me the steady I need to keep my hands raised until the sun goes down. What about you? What about you? What is grit going to give you when you unlock it? Those of you going to school, going to college, what does grit look like for you? When you go back to work tomorrow, what does grit look like for you? When we receive God's gift of steady hands. I can have tears in my eyes and still have steady hands. I can have a broken heart and still have steady hands. I can have $0 in my bank account, God forbid, but for the purpose of the sermon, still have steady hands. What does it look like when we receive God's gift of steady hands? Please don't mishear me. It doesn't mean that life becomes easy. It doesn't change the fact that you're actually in a battle, because you are. It doesn't change the fact that the Amalekites are still trying to destroy you. It doesn't change the fact that every day ain't Sunday. It doesn't change the fact that you got a stack of bills. It doesn't change the fact that you've got some family issues. It doesn't change the fact that you've got some grief you're going to have to bear. It doesn't change any of that, but it does promise steady hands in the midst of it. What does grit mean for you? Stand on your feet.